He would stop at nothing to get into her pants, but she would also stop at nothing to get what she wants. And there lies the problem the universe must solve for Joe and Becca. Joe desperately wanted to sleep with Becca ever since she walked into the interview room a year ago when he had been on the team recruiting for the company. He had wanted to get into bed with her since then. Becca had outperformed all the other candidates, and she had been the top choice for everyone on the team, but that didn't stop the whispers. Becca heard the stories, the water cooler gossip, and she didn't miss the snide remarks made by some of the less subtle ones of her colleagues. They all felt she was only hired because she was a woman and because some of them had expected to be promoted to the position Becca was engaged in. Well, they hated her all the more. Ping, ping, ping. Becca scrambled to mute notifications on her phone. All eyes were immediately on her. She had unintentionally interrupted the management meeting that was being held. Fuck. Rebecca cursed under her breath. She wondered who the hell it was that was texting her repeatedly. Do you mind? Jeff, one of the sales managers speaking at the time, said in annoyance. Becca felt embarrassed. Although she was technically Jeff's superior, he still felt entitled to speak to her whichever way he wanted. After the meeting, Becca unlocked her phone, and there they were. Joe had sent her another thread of inappropriate texts on her WhatsApp. This time, he had sent her a barrage of sexually suggestive stickers alongside the messages where he was more or less asking to sleep with her. Becca felt a level of disgust and anger she hadn't felt towards anyone before. She decided then and there to confront Joe about the unsolicited texts and graphics that he'd been sending her. Joe started as a friendly boss who seemed invested in her growth within the company, but soon enough, that friendliness soon became something untoward. When Becca joined the company, Joe was the employee charged with integrating her into the company. On her first day, Joe had prepared a folder containing all she needed to know about her role in the company. He had even included a couple of notes about the best places to have lunch and hang out after work. Becca had found these gestures kind and had warmed up to him until he began to cross the line. Becca initially decided to pay him no mind, making excuses for him every time he crossed the line with a lingering touch or an offensive joke. But as time passed, it became increasingly harder to ignore him and these texts. After the meeting, Becca stayed back to confront Joe about the texts. Becca thought of a million ways to do the confrontation as politely as possible. Regardless of what Joe was doing to her, he was still her boss and still had the power to make her lose her job or at least make her miserable if he wanted. Hi, Joe. Hi, Becca. Joe drew out the last syllable of her name and rolled the tip of his tongue in a way that Becca found repulsive. Joe, I'd appreciate it if you do not send me this kind of text again. They make me uncomfortable, and it is inappropriate. You are my boss. Well, which means you should do as I say, Joe cuts in. You do as I say, Becca. If I want you to make my damn coffee, you make it. If I want you to fuck me, you do. I am not an assistant, Joe. I'm a management-level employee. I do not make your coffee, and I do not share your bed. Well, we'll see about that. Joe was used to having his way with junior colleagues. In fact, for the most part, they were more than willing to share his bed. Becca's rejection was, therefore, a hard pill for him to swallow. No one ever turned him down. He was rich, classy, influential, and devilishly good-looking. What else could anyone want? Becca was mentally exhausted. She didn't need Joe becoming more aggressive in his harassment of her. It was bad enough she had subordinates who found it hard to take orders from her. It was bad enough that she had to do all the tasks in her department if she wanted anything done. The extra work meant that she had less time to spend with her husband, which was putting significant strain on their marriage, especially since they started trying for a baby. Her husband, David, wanted her to slow down and spend more time at home. According to him, she was becoming a stranger, and it made no sense that he was trying to have a child with a stranger. David was beginning to get paranoid and suspicious of her, and the last thing Becca needed at the moment was for her and Dave to be fighting. She needed to talk to someone. Joe was getting more aggressive by the day. He had gone from sending her nasty stickers to sending her nude photos of himself. He had also graduated to pressing himself against her whenever he had the chance. He had taken the harassment to a whole new level. All these meant that Becca tried to avoid him as often as she could, which told her that she could not talk about her promotion to him. Becca felt she had put in enough work to warrant an upgrade, even though she was relatively new at the job. Becca decided to confide in her only work friend, Adam. Adam strongly advised Becca against asking for a promotion. He thought it was too early for her and that her requesting an upgrade might encourage Joe to harass her further. All these on the surface would have seemed like good-natured, friendly advice, except it wasn't. Adam wanted the promotion for himself. Although he acted like her friend, Adam secretly shared the opinion that the only reason Becca was at the company was to boost the company's equality ratings and that she wasn't qualified for her position. After discouraging Becca from making any moves, he approached Joe to plead his case for a new role and better benefits. The irony is that most of the work Adam highlighted as to why he should be considered for promotion were projects Becca either supervised or worked on with him was lost as he pitched hard for the position. The year was coming to a close, and the company's retreat grew closer. Becca knew if she wanted a promotion, she needed to make her move immediately, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. By then, she had developed a fear of Joe that caused her so much anxiety that she started to avoid leaving her office and attending team events and meetings. Things had escalated quickly with Joe, who was hell-bent on having his way. Becca had initially assumed that Joe would tire out and leave her be, so she ignored him. But it seemed as though ignoring him only encouraged him as he got more aggressive by the day. She knew she had to start working things out with David about starting a family. Becca was so overwhelmed by all these things, she didn't have any time to pay attention to office politics and, unfortunately, got caught in it as a pawn. She found out at the last moment that her work friend had applied for the position after discouraging her from doing the same. She felt betrayed, but decided to move on with her life, hoping things would make a turn for the better, but they soon would make a turn for the worse. Becca decided to report Joe's harassment of her to Human Resources, hoping that would get him to stop. She filed an official sexual harassment report detailing her experience with Joe. Joe was influential both within and outside the company, but Becca underestimated the extent of his influence with what happened right after she filed her report. At the company's end-of-year retreat, Becca got a text from the HR manager requesting that she report to the rooftop to review her case. Although Becca found this highly unusual, she decided to go anyway. When Becca stepped up onto the rooftop, she knew she had made a grave mistake. There was Joe with a devilish grin and no one else. Where was the HR manager? Where were the other management team members? Joe unexpectedly charged at her and kissed her. He groped her breast and pushed his penis against her while she struggled to break free. What the hell is going on here? It was no accident that David showed up at the company's retreat. He had gotten a call from the one he knew as his wife's friend and colleague at work, Adam, saying his wife had suddenly gotten sick and needed to be returned home. He had asked why they didn't check her into a hospital nearby before he got there, but Adam had told him that she was refusing to go and had requested to see him specifically. Joe had asked Adam in exchange for getting the promotion to help set Becca up. Joe saw David as an obstacle and naively thought that if he got him out of the picture, he would stand a better chance with Becca. He offered Becca a promotion and other benefits if she agreed to sleep with him just one time. Joe's attempt to sabotage Becca's marriage unleashed something in her. Deciding to save her home first, Becca went to David with all the texts and explained what had been going on at her workplace to him. The young couple was soon reconciled, and it was time to light the remaining battle as a team. And it was time to fight the remaining battle as a team. Knowing that the Human Resources Department was compromised, Becca made screenshots of all the texts and images that Joe had been sending to her and forwarded them to HR, copying the CEO and COO of the company. They promptly invited her for a meeting to get to the root of the matter, where it became clear that not only had Joe repeatedly harassed and assaulted Becca, but he had also interfered in her personal life, almost costing her her relationship with her spouse. They also reviewed Becca's performance over the past year and all the projects she had led within the company, and it was clear that she merited a promotion. The CEO promptly offered her a new position with increased pay, but Becca had none of it. She wanted more than just a pay increase. She wanted to interview and select her team members, better health insurance coverage, remote work options, and most importantly, paid maternity leave. Well, Becca got all she wanted in compensation for all the trouble Joe had put her through. Becca couldn't wait to break the news to David. This was the start of a new phase of their lives. Even though it had taken a lot to get there, she wouldn't have it any other way. Becca hurried home after the meeting. She had a lot of great news to share. They were pregnant and now had the resources they needed to start their lives as parents. And she knew that they'd make great parents. And she knew, of course, that she was about to change the face of her company for women and mothers.
It was a cold winter evening, and silence was spread all around. A chilling breeze was blowing through the trees. George, a 17-year-old black teenager, was standing in the middle of the graveyard where his father was buried. He remembered just a day ago how different his life was. His father was with him. They talked and laughed while working, and suddenly there was nothing. His life has suddenly come to an abrupt halt, and the emptiness. He felt like the purpose of his life was vanishing in the air. The sound of his father's words, laughter, advice, screams, everything was still ringing in his ears, and that dark face with the light of love and innocence was still in front of his eyes. Tears were falling from his eyes, but his expressions were bleak. Why? That single word was haunting him ever since his father's demise. He wanted to crush the whole world, scream his lungs out, scratch the grave, and take his father back. But his face of him and the innocent smile there till the very end was holding him back. He was the one who should be killed, not his father. Then why? He wanted to be killed along with him, but not yet. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, he remembered his father once told him. He nodded in denial and fell to the ground on his knees. That bullet didn't kill me, Dad, but it didn't make me strong either. Why did you do that, Dad? You deprived me of all those hopes which I have built. What should I do now? I am lost. I have no idea what to do. Guide me. I am in pain. I am in pain, he murmured with a broken voice. And in response, no voice came except the rustling of leaves and branches. But in the back of his mind, he knew what his father would have said at this moment, like he always used to say. Always remember, my son, this pain, this life, these hardships, these people, everything is temporary. Don't let them get in your way and affect you. Your kind behavior, your kind words, and all those good deeds you have done for people will be the only thing of worth. He sniffled and rubbed his eyes. You got to get up and make sure not to give up on yourself, even if there is no one to keep your back steady. You are my pride, son. You are the hope for your mother and sister after me. Will you promise me to look after me? Yes, Dad, I will. He remembered their conversation after his father was diagnosed with cancer. Those past statements strengthened him and encouraged him to do what was right and what he promised. Wiping his face, sending some last prayers towards heaven, he moved towards the exit, walking past the empty junkyard near his home, where his father used to work, reminded him of those good days when he learned a lot of new things. They would laugh together and discuss the complications of life. He used to show him fundamental moral values and human worth through his acts. The way he treated, talked, worked, and behaved with people and animals around him was the model he had always followed for years. Not even a single person in his life had any complaint to him. Everyone respected him due to his upright character and kind nature. He used to teach his son about work ethics and management so that he would be appreciated among people just as he was. When he entered the small home with a shabby interior, it was dark outside. His mother was lying on the bed, looking at the roof blankly. Silent tears were leaving the corners of her eyes and falling on the pillow. His little sister wept while hugging the only photo they had of their father. When his mother noticed George entering the room, her silence broke and turned into muffled, painful cries. She got up from bed and hugged her son. I knew sooner or later we would be separated from your father since he had cancer, and I prepared for myself for that day. But yesterday's incident broke all my expectations. George wasn't prepared for that. She cried on his shoulder. No one was, Mom, he whispered while crying back. I never thought the cause of your father's death could be anything other than cancer. He did nothing wrong to anyone. Why did he kill my Ray? He was a cop. He was supposed to be with justice. How could he kill a person? He will be punished for what he did. I will make sure of that. Rage and fire were burning in his eyes. The whole incident playing in his mind again and again. His father, unfortunately, developed societal cancer of racism, hatred, and greed. This cancer is far worse than any cancer. Since he buried his father this morning, he had decided to fight for his father's rights against the societal cancer of racism and corruption. He determined to take Lieutenant Schwan Cooper to the gallows for his heinous crime and had enough evidence. A day before, a blue tow truck entered the junkyard premises, and before it could go any further, an officer from inside the place came and motioned Mr. Raymond was in the driving seat to stop the vehicle and come down. George was sitting on the passenger seat beside his father, observed the unusual activity. They both came out of the car and went to the officer, standing all proud and straight with raised eyebrows. George looked around and found no worker was there in the junkyard. That was strange because usually everyone was around this time in the morning. Out of nowhere, an assistant officer, besides the lieutenant, stepped forward and handcuffed Mr. Raymond without questioning or charges. This action caused a sudden panic and shock for both Mr. Raymond and George. "What are you doing?" George asked the sergeant, who was pushing and pinning down his father and putting on cuffs forcefully. "Sir, can you please tell me what I have done to deserve this behavior?" Raymond asked the lieutenant while trying to cooperate with Sergeant. "Shut up, you drug-selling moron. You want to talk? We'll talk in jail." The lieutenant spoke curtly, making them anxious about what was happening. "Sir, you must have some sort of misunderstanding. I have never been associated with drugs in any way, let alone sold them to someone." Raymond explained himself to the lieutenant. Meanwhile, the sergeant moved to the truck, took out a nylon bag and underneath his jacket, and threw it inside the car. Unfortunately, George saw him throwing it. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing? What did you throw inside?" George tried to get his father's attention and looked suspiciously at the sergeant. "Oh, we must be misunderstood? Really?" The lieutenant continued the conversation, stopping Mr. Raymond from looking behind and listening to his son. "We have got the tip that you are a drug dealer. Check the truck, sir." "Wait a minute, sir. I saw your officer throwing a nylon bag inside." George spoke more loudly to get everyone's attention this time. A floating expression of contempt appeared on the lieutenant's face, but he hid it perfectly. Raising an eyebrow, he confidently addressed, "That was a nice trick to distract us, but I'm not a fool. Check the truck, Sergeant." "I'm not using any tricks. Sir, I saw this man." "Sir, a packet is found." A sergeant came with a brown cuboid packet cut from the center, revealing boxes of drugs inside. The glint of cunningness in his eyes as he achieved his goal. "You found? You liar! You put it there yourself!" George lashed out, not believing what was happening. "George, calm down. Let me talk." Mr. Raymond tried to hold back George with cuffed hands. "Hey, you, the tiny little bug of a drug seller. How dare you call my officer a liar? You want to get arrested along with your father?" "My father did nothing wrong, and you have no right to arrest him. Your sergeant throws the nylon bag before my eyes, and he's lying." The lieutenant came near George and, looking right into his eyes, spoke as if challenging him. "Do you have any evidence to prove what you saw?" And at that moment, George knew it was all planned. But what he couldn't understand was why they were doing it. Mr. Raymond, who had been observing the lieutenant's disgust towards him, understood very well why they were trying to do it. You have planned this all yourself? Why? George asked. George, stop this. You must be mistaken. Raymond tried to close the argument because he didn't want George to face the consequences of any situation. Me? Did what? Lieutenant asked with a smirk. How could you do that? You are an embodiment of justice. Why are you playing this illegal act and blaming it an innocent person? George couldn't believe it because the world was too simple for him. First thing, we are not answerable to any of your foolish questions. Secondly, if you said one more word against us, you will also be arrested. You can't take him. I will tell everyone you are a fraud and a cheater, George shouted while the sergeant was dragging his father to the police car. Sure, tell if you lived that long. The lieutenant laughed and took his revolver and pointed it towards George. George was at his wit's end, suddenly pushed to the ground, and heard a shot. Moments later, he saw his father lying on the floor with blood oozing from his chest. Everyone went still for a moment, and when the realization hit them, they went into action. George was crying and trying to talk with his father, who was lying unconscious. The lieutenant immediately called the control room and sent a message to the station. One culprit found in drug selling died in an encounter in junkyard situated north of Finkel Street. Send the Team 3 for immediate inspection. 1 week later, Sean Cooper, a son of a famous business tycoon, Albert Cooper, who served as a lieutenant, is being dragged to prison after a hearing in the courtroom. According to sources, it was proved through evidence that he murdered Raymond Harrison and allegedly blamed him for drug selling and falsifying the evidence. As per charges against him, he has been deprived of his position and badge, and the court sentenced him to life imprisonment. A news reporter outside the courtroom was speaking on the television in a small house where Mrs. Raymond and her children were sitting. They were watching the news and shedding tears on the justice provided to their departed soul of Raymond Harrison. Furthermore, it has been come to notice that evidence was provided by the son of Raymond Harrison, named George Harrison, in the form of a videotape recorded from the black box of an unidentified car in the junkyard where the victim's body was investigated. The confessionary statement of ex-Sergeant Billy Wright clarified evidence, which explained that all those allegations against Raymond Harrison were nothing but a pre-planned execution due to racial hatred and greed for promotion. Court has sentenced him to 7 years of imprisonment for hiding the fact and causing hindrance in justice. The censored evidence video was being broadcast on the news. George turned off the television and served the food on the small table where they were all sitting. Come on, let's have these banana pancakes in the memory of Dad. Just when they were going to eat, a black car stopped outside their home, and a well-suited older man entered their home. George welcomed him inside and offered him a seat. He looked around their small house and then introduced himself. I am Albert Cooper. My condolences will not be sufficient for your loss, but I would like to apologize and compensate for your loss. I am sorry to say this, but you cannot bring our father back, and you do not need to apologize. What your son did wasn't your fault, George replied. I know I can't bring your father back, but since, due to the ill nature of my son, you lost your father, the least I can do is to make sure you live a good life. And for that reason, I would like to give your family my whole wealth. We appreciate your concern, but we don't want all this aid. My children and I will be able to manage through thick and thin, so you don't have to worry about that, Mrs. Raymond replied humbly. Look, Mrs. Raymond, I insist. That way, a burden from my heart will be lessened a bit. I believe it was my responsibility to keep a check on my son, but unfortunately I couldn't. Now, in compensation for that, I want to see your children brought up under good care. That way I can die with a little ease, at least. Consider it an appeal of an older man with little time to live. In the end, good deeds are all that matters. George looked into his eyes at once. Those were the exact words his father used to say. Something pulled inside his heart, and he slightly nodded his head in acceptance. Mrs. Raymond wasn't expecting this from him, but stayed silent. While seeing Mr. Albert off, the only thing in George's mind was that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, one way or another. This is what life is, unpredictable. Tommy didn't hear what the men were saying, but he realized that this stranger might be his salvation. The boy began to bang furiously on the attic window and shout that he was there. Alas, the stranger did not hear him. Tommy opened his backpack and pulled out a box. That was his last delivery for the day. He was hoping Mr. Hanokin would tip. When Tommy was 19, he always wanted to eat because most of his earnings were taken by his adoptive parents. Besides, Tommy was trying to save from his meager wages. Mr. Hanokin looked like a man of wealth, his clothes and the house furnishings. The man grabbed the parcel impatiently, and there was a suspicious noise inside. Mr. Hanokin frowned and opened the box. There was a lot of shrapnel inside it. Someone deliberately smashed the contents of the package with a hammer. Tommy turned pale with fear. "Boy, do you know how much this vase was worth?" asked Mr. Hanokin. "Your life won't pay that much." Tommy was always the unlucky guy. He remembered that he was happy long ago, but it was in his childhood when he lived with his mother. But unfortunately, she died early. Tommy didn't remember her face at all, but he did place the warm hands, the scent of perfume, and her cheerful voice. "God has a wonderful parcel for you," she said when they were lucky in something. When there were a few failures, his mother said, "The parcel from God has not yet reached the address." After Tommy's mother died, he went to the orphanage, but was there for a short time. One day, a married couple, Mr. and Mrs. White, came to the orphanage. They took not only Tommy out of the orphanage, but 2 more boys and 1 girl. They chose very carefully and for a long time. Tommy didn't like the new parents' behavior. At first, the couple treated the children well, but as soon as the children grew up and were able to work, everything changed. The White family lived on a farm. They kept horses, goats, and poultry. They needed the children as a free labor force. To do this, the spouses took from the orphanage the children, who seemed to them the strongest and most enduring. Since childhood, the White couple had been busy with their adopted children. At the same time, the adoptive parents constantly told the children how lucky they were to be taken away from the orphanage, and that they would grow up as human beings. Tommy had gone from being a chubby, handsome boy to a skinny, stubby little guy. He was always looking over his shoulder, waiting to be beaten by his stepfather. His white skin had grown brown from constant exposure to the sun and poor washing. Hard calluses appeared on his legs because the children did not wear shoes in the summer and ran barefoot. Hands were constantly stained, or chicks from work with dirty water. It wasn't pleasant for the kids there. Despite his hard life, Tommy was very fond of reading. They did not send their adopted children to school, but Mrs. White taught them literacy basics. She taught them simple arithmetic and lesson. Tommy was allowed to use the home library. Although Mr. White was dissatisfied with Tommy reading a lot, Mrs. White insisted that he not touch the boy for reading. Although she supported her husband, she was not as cruel as her husband. "Do you want to go blind from books?" Mr. White grumbled and took another book from Tommy. Tommy was silent, though sometimes he thought it better to go blind than to see the ugly face of his adopted father. But the books distracted Tommy from his dark thoughts and drove him away from the scary reality. The boy learned many new things. Alas, there was no question of Tommy going to school or college. Tommy sometimes thought about running away, but where would he run to? He did not know his mother's family. She never told him if they had relatives. Now there was no one to ask. Tommy was afraid to talk to strangers because his adoptive parents would scare their ward with tales of how scary people were behind the farm. But one of the children thought otherwise and one day tried to escape. Of course, he was caught. Mr. White beat the boy severely and threw him into the building where the inventory was kept. The adoptive father closed the building and threatened the children not to look there and bring nothing to the culprit, no food or water. The frightened children did not dare to contradict. Tommy walked around the building and listened. There was only wheezing. Tommy decided and secretly brought the boy water, but his brother was so beaten that he could neither drink nor eat. After a while, the battered boy was quiet, and Tommy was scared. He realized that his brother had died, and tears covered his eyes. The terrible cry of his stepfather made him colder. Tommy hurriedly wiped his tears with his fist. "Tommy, where are you, you lousy piece of shit?" Mr. White was looking for Tommy. The boy snuck out of the building and pretended to come out from the other side. "I'm here, Father." "Tommy, you're out here. You're coming with me," said Father. But first, he opened the building and looked inside. Mr. White saw the beaten boy had died. The man slammed the door shut. Mr. White grabbed Tommy's shoulder painfully and dragged him towards the house. "Where are we going?" asked the boy. "None of your business. You need to sit quietly in the attic and come down only when I say so." The boy did not contradict. He realized long ago that any word against turns into a beating. Moreover, he was terrified of the death of his brother. Mr. White locked Tommy in the attic, and Tommy snuck into the attic window to see what was happening. He saw a car pull up to the house and a well-dressed man come out. Mr. White was very courteous to him. The men greeted him. "I'm here for Tommy. I'm told your family adopted him," said the man. "Oh yes, we've been warned," said Mr. White. "But I'm afraid you're too late." "What happened?" the man asked alarmingly. "He had an accident, volunteered to help us on the farm, and horses trampled on him. Tommy died." After a few years, Tommy grew up. Despite the meager food and occasional beatings, he became a handsome guy with piercing gray eyes. His brother and sister stayed on the farm, and Tommy begged his adoptive parents to send him to town to make money. Mr. White did not want to let his adopted son leave the farm, but his wife supported him and insisted that he had to go to work. To avoid leaving the boy unsupervised, Mr. White arranged for him to stay with his cousin. Tommy and Jack worked in delivery. Jack worked as if he were doing his time. Yes, the young man was prone to an idle lifestyle, and his father wanted to re-educate him. He arranged for an arrogant son to be placed in the most specific and lowest paid position. Jack tried to take the lightest orders to avoid bothering them too much. But Tommy took any job. He was used to working hard on the farm with his stepfather, so his current job didn't seem that hard. Although sometimes there were so many orders, Tommy would come home, eat, and fall asleep almost immediately. At least his cousin Jack had time to have fun and party all night. His uncle often used Tommy as an example, and Jack did not like it. He hated Tommy and tried to insult, frame, or humiliate him in every way. "Hey, Tommy," he said, "take another shower. The farm smell is still on you." Tommy tried to ignore Jack, but not only did Jack hurt Tommy himself, but he also encouraged his fellow couriers to harass him. They hid his ordering boxes so that Tommy would be late to order and reprimanded, tripped him up, insulted him. Tommy held back as much as possible because he knew any conflict would be an excuse to get him back to the farm. More than anything, Tommy didn't want to go back to where he'd spent his unhappy childhood. Jack's father tried to stop these antics, but first of all, he was always preoccupied with more important things. Secondly, Tommy was not related to him. From his cousin, Mr. White knew precisely how much Tommy made, and demanded that he give up most of his earnings and keep only the smallest part. He always told the guy he owed him a lot because he was taken from the orphanage, fed and watered. It was only because of his foster parents that he was worth something. Tommy didn't think so, but he was still afraid to contradict. He was worried not only about himself, but of his brother and sister who stayed at home. Because if he goes out of his way, Mr. White will take it out on the rest of us. Tommy was so excited when his clients got their packages and tipped him. No one knew about the money, and Tommy was saving up a little to disappear from his adoptive parents' lives once and for all and take his brother and sister. One day his uncle, watching the heavy box Tommy was carrying, said with envy, "My cousin made Tommy a good man, but my son is no good." When Tommy heard what his uncle said, he turned pale and barely held the box in his hands. The memories of his brutal upbringing and dead brother returned to him. Suddenly, he turned to his uncle. "Believe me, mister, it's better for Jack to never experience the proper education." Uncle looked at the young man with surprise. Tommy realized that his boss didn't know how the White family was raising foster kids and that he was using them as free labor. But Tommy said nothing to his uncle. Who would believe him? One day, his uncle called Tommy. "I have an essential errand for you. I cannot entrust this package to my son or his friends. At least I can rely on you," said the uncle. "Sure, mister," said Tommy. His uncle handed him a small box tightly sealed. "This is valuable cargo for Mr. Henokin. The address is there. I'm sure you can handle it." "I'll make it right," said Tommy. Tommy came out of the office with a valuable box. Unfortunately, Jack heard the conversation. He was furious that his father was unflattering about his son. In addition, Jack wanted to hurt Tommy badly. He called his friends and whispered something to them. The courier's friends dove according to the nod. "Hey, Tommy," said Jack. Tommy didn't want to look back. He was in a hurry to see the client and was afraid for his box. "I don't have time, Jack. I have a lot of work to do," said Tommy. "Tommy, you're overthinking me. I just wanted you to help me as a friend. Will you help me?" Jack asked. Tommy hesitated. On one hand, he had to fulfill the order. On the other, he wanted to reconcile with Jack. "How can I help you?" Tommy asked. "Help me carry the box over there. I can't do it alone," said Jack, pointing to the enormous box in the warehouse. Tommy carefully placed his valuable cargo and went after Jack. While the boys were hauling a big box, Jack's friend stole Tommy's order and opened it. There was a beautiful vase, apparently very expensive and ancient. One of Jack's friends took a hammer and broke the vase into pieces. Then they resealed the box and put it back. Tommy left with his commission, and Jack and his buddies laughed, imagining how Tommy would get in trouble. "It'll be a surprise," said Jack. "Tommy's going to cry and say it's not him," picked up one. "But no one will believe him," said the second. Tommy did not suspect anything and brought the package to Mr. Henokin. When the man opened the door, Tommy was surprised. Somehow he thought he'd seen this man's face before. But in a short period, Tommy saw so many people in town that he could easily confuse one with the other. Tommy was handing out a package and thinking about tips when the crash happened. The man opened the parcel, and he saw the vase in the box had been mercilessly smashed. Tommy knew instantly whose work it was, but what could he prove? "Boy, do you know how much this vase was worth?" asked Mr. Henokin. "Your life won't pay that much." But if the loss of an ancient vase saddened Mr. Henokin, then Tommy was mentally bidding farewell to the city, the dream of getting out of the farm from his abusive foster parents. "The parcel from God didn't reach the addressee," blurted Tommy, saying his mother's favorite tale. "What did you say?" What did you say?" Mr. Henokin asked suddenly in a shriveled voice. "I'm sorry, mister. It just popped out," said Tommy. "Repeat the phrase," said the man. "The parcel from God didn't reach the addressee," said Tommy. "My mother said when things didn't work out." Mr. Henokin seemed to have forgotten about the package, about the vase, and he grabbed the guy's shoulder, looking up at his face. "Tommy, you're Tommy," he suddenly asked. Tommy looked at the man again and realized that he had seen him since his brother died. "Yes, I remember. You came." "Tommy, I was looking for you. And Helen, your mother. My sister was too proud, and when her fiancé left her, she didn't want us to know. It was too late when she died. I found the orphanage, but you were sent. I found a foster family, but they told me you were dead, and even showed me the body." That was my brother's body. Mr. White killed him. What a terrible thing. Mr. Hanokin grabbed his head. What you've been through, Tommy. Mr. Hanokin showed the family photos, so Tommy saw his mother's face for the first time, because he didn't remember her. Going back to the farm was out of the question. Mr. Hanokin, with his connections and money, helped not only Tommy, but also his foster brother and sister. Tommy made up for the gaps in his studies and went to college, because he always had the ability and the craving for knowledge. Despite the objections of his uncle, Tommy continued to work as a courier. He was not interested in sedentary life and partying. Sometimes he would take a picture of his mother and say to her, "God has a wonderful package for you. I have everything well, and I love you, Mother." It's time to wake up. It's time to wake up. It's time to wake up. A shallow voice spoke inside his head. It was a bright Saturday morning. The birds were chirping in the skies, filling up the airwaves with their melodious songs as they flew happily in circles. Alex woke up a little bit later than usual, especially considering that it was a Sunday, his favorite day. Alex always looked forward to Sundays. Because he could have the most fun out of all the days of the week. He sat upright on his bed, struggling to keep his eyes wide open. He must have had one hell of a night. His eyelids were heavy, as if they were loaded with tiny bags of cement. Alex lazily lifted his right hand and rubbed his eyes, slowly looking from right to left. To his bedside desk, picking up his glasses and putting them on. Everything now looked crisper, and a smile lit up his face as he imagined all the fun activities that awaited him. "Mom, I'm up," Alex shouted in a happy tone, calling out to his mother, Lorraine, who was already turning the corner into his bedroom. "Hello, my sunshine. How was your morning?" She responded with a beaming smile as she walked into the room. She was just as excited as he was. Lorraine loved her son more than anything else in her life. "I am good, Mom. How are you doing?" Alex asked, genuinely curious to know. The two of them exchanged greetings before Alex finally raised his arms like he usually did, and without any questions, his mom Lorraine knew what it meant. She went over to the corner of the room, grabbed his wheelchair, and brought it closer to the bed before helping her son get on top of it. Alex had cerebral palsy, a condition that left him confined to a wheelchair for the better part of his life. He lived through this disability with the help of his mother. After a delicious breakfast, the two left the house at around 10 a.m., their day already planned. First, they would go to the nearby playground, where Alex would meet up with a few of his friends and play. They would then leave for lunch later in the day to his favorite restaurant, a locally owned restaurant serving the best wings in town. Before capping off the day at the theaters, everything seemed perfect, and they were beyond excited. To his surprise, Alex was the first to arrive, but his friends came a few minutes later. The next couple of hours went well, and all the kids had the time of their lives. They played on the swings, and they played with their ball, just being kids. But as we know, all good things must come to an end. "Excuse me, do you kids live here?" an anonymous woman asked. At first, the kids continued playing and having fun, oblivious to the fact that she was speaking to them. But when she asked for the second time, they had to turn around and see what she wanted. "Hey, how may I help you?" Ian, one of Alex's friends, asked. Ian was also a disabled kid. He suffered from rickets at an early age, and as a result, he had bow-legged feet. "Do you know that this playground is reserved only for residents of this apartment right across the street? Huh? Who permitted you to play here? Do you have any adults with you that I can speak to?" the rude lady asked. By that point, all of them knew what she was going on. The lady was called Karen. She was a Caucasian female, probably in her late 30s or mid-40s. She was far from appealing to look at, and her character only worsened things. From the way she spoke, it was clear that she had zero respect for the innocent children who were trying to have a good time. And she viewed them as lesser beings, all of them beneath her, like she was some goddess whose words were to be taken as the golden rule. "Hello, is everything okay here, Alex?" Lorraine asked, having moved closer when she saw the commotion. "Are you the parent to these strange kids?" the rude woman asked. "Strange? What do you mean by that?" "Yes, I am in charge of these children, and they are not harming anybody. They are just a bunch of kids trying to play and have a great time. Leave them alone, please." Lorraine responded after a short silence. She was clearly shaken by the harsh words that had come out of that woman's foul mouth, but nothing could prepare her for what she would hear next. "You have to leave right now. This playground is reserved for residents of this apartment building only. This playground is for normal kids, not those. My child has been peeping through the window all morning, scared to come out and play because of your kids. So please do me a favor and find somewhere else to play. You know, somewhere you belong." The rude woman spoke. It was a tough pill to swallow. None of them could believe what had just gone through their ears. Lorraine stood perplexed to the ground. Her heart rate spiked. She could feel the anger and rage boiling within her, ready to burst out, and she clenched her fists tighter and harder, praying to the gods to give her the strength to act right in front of her son, to set an example that she would be proud of in the future. This was the first time Alex had seen his mom so angry and frustrated. But above all, she was devastated from within, and he could tell. He moved closer to his mom and held her hand, and immediately she felt better and more relaxed. Without speaking to the rude woman, Lorraine and her son bid goodbye to their friends, who were also leaving, and they all returned to their respective homes. That night, Lorraine struggled to get some sleep. She turned around in bed, crying until her eyes were red and sore. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the harsh words that had come from Karen's mouth, and it was like someone driving a sharp dagger right into her stomach, slowly turning it and ripping her guts to shreds. That is how bad and painful she felt. A train of thoughts ran through her mind. She asked herself why someone could be such a bitch, especially to little innocent children. She found herself cussing the whole night, trying to find peace. What did she do to deserve this? Had she done enough to protect her baby boy from the world and other people like that wretched witch? She asked herself these and more questions. It was hard to fathom how cold the earth could be, but eventually she made peace with herself, knowing that she had to be strong for her son. On the other hand, Alex was a little stung at the moment, but more than anything, he was pissed off. He wondered what he had done to deserve this treatment, but in the end, he remembered everything his mom had taught him. Over the coming weeks and months, the rude rich woman somehow discovered where Alex lived with his mom. She would pretend she was going out for a jog with her dogs and spend a little bit more time outside their house, peeping through their window, trying to see how they lived. She could not understand why what she termed an abomination lived so close to her. She could not believe that she shared social amenities with people that were way below her social and financial class. At first, Lorraine and Alex thought it was just a coincidence that they would see her so often after the incident. But soon they realized she was stalking them, even when they went to the stores to get some groceries. One evening, Lorraine decided to confront her to see why she was doing all the extra stuff, especially because she was so interested in her business. "Why are you doing all this? Why do you hate us so much? I do not think we have done anything to you ever before. My son and I do not even know who you are. You need to start minding your business, lady. Leave me and my son alone. Do you understand?" Lorraine said to her in the middle of the grocery store. The incident turned a couple of heads, but almost everyone seemed to agree with Lorraine. It was as if they knew how terrible of a human being the rich Caucasian woman was. Her bad behavior was not limited to Lorraine, but to everyone else she deemed lower than her. She would exhibit her snappy, repulsive character to the cashiers, janitors, and even disabled children. It was indeed a horrific sight. "What are you going to do about it, you peasant? Do not make me call the cops and sue you for harassment. And for the record, never talk to me again unless I speak to you first," the rude lady said, making a disrespectful clicking sound with her tongue, before walking out of the grocery store. She was the most arrogant and self-centered human being one could ever meet. "Mom, why do you think she hates us so much?" Alex asked his mom, genuinely interested to know why. He could not wrap his head around it. "I do not know, son. She has her problems. There are good and bad people in this world, and horrible people like her. I want you to promise me that you will always be respectful. Alex, I want you to promise me that you will set a good example for those around you. Can you do that for me, baby?" Lorraine asked Alex. "Yes, Mom, I promise. To be the best version of myself I can be," Alex responded. The two of them went on their shopping as usual before making their way home. As soon as Lorraine had finished unloading the groceries from the back of the car, she received a phone call and was informed that she was urgently needed back at the hospital. It was on a Saturday, one of her days off, but she cared about helping people. Lorraine quickly made her way to the hospital. She worked as a nurse. Upon arrival, she found that the atmosphere was hectic. Everything was moving so fast. And as per protocol, she knew it was most likely a gruesome accident. Lorraine quickly checked in and started helping out immediately, unloading the victims from the ambulances as they came in. Little did she know that the next victim she would see was someone that would hit so close to home. On one of the stretchers lay the lifeless body of the rude Karen, completely drenched in blood from the head to her thighs. Her legs had been entirely crushed in the accident that supposedly reduced her expensive car to a mangled wreck. She could feel a tear flowing down her cheek. She did not love the woman who had been rude and disrespectful to her and her son from the start, but even she could not wish that on her worst enemy. The doctors said that she had survived miraculously, but now she had to be amputated if she was to stay longer and make it out alive. It was hard to believe. That night, Lorraine explained to her son everything that had happened. 2 weeks later, the rude woman awoke from her coma. The doctors explained what had to be done for her to survive. She also found out that Lorraine was the nurse in charge of taking care of her. She could not believe it. She tried to scream, but her voice was lost. She watched in disbelief as tears of pain, bitterness, and regret flowed down her cheeks to her hospital gown. The moral of the story is you should never be a bitch, or life will punish you. The sun invaded the bedroom with its golden rays and reflected on Margaret's hair. Grayson held a tray in his hands. He walked carefully into the room. When he noticed his wife was still fast asleep, he stared at her blonde hair that radiated under the sun's rays. Her beautiful lashes were long and thick. Her lips were full and had a strawberry tint. He stood at the door still for more than 60 seconds, watched her without blinking. Finally, he entered the room and set the tray aside. He pecked her cheeks and she didn't even budge. Soon he deepened the kiss, and his ragged breath was the catalyst that woke her up. All along, she thought she was dreaming, yet the man was on her bed kissing her. She tried to push him away, but Grayson's muscular arms didn't bulge. He pried her lips open and inserted her tongue. Her mouth tasted a bit sour, but he loved it. Margaret bit his tongue, but he endured the pain. He slowly raised the duvet on her body. carefully climbed on the bed and then pressed her while she tried to free herself. Soon Margaret stopped trying to push her husband away and started to move to meet his gentle yet intense thrust. Her moaning filled the room with warmth. It was like a melody to Grayson's ears. Grayson and Margaret had been married for 2.5 years, yet every day still felt like the first time he set eyes on her. Some years ago, a woman bashed into his car while trying to reverse. Other women would have stepped down from their car and apologized for their mistake, but Margaret did not. "Why is your car parked here?" Grayson felt his ears go red. The overdressed woman had bashed his car and was trying to push the blame on him. Grayson gouged her dress from head to toe and immediately knew she was one of those women trying to climb into his bed. He shook his head and looked at her with determination because he would teach her a lesson. He laughed dryly and said, "You think this lame joke of yours will get you into my bed? You must be dumb then." "How dare you call me dumb?" Grayson sneered in his heart. He had seen countless women pretending to get close to him. "There's no way I will let you go unless you fix my car. I know you hit me on purpose. I've seen almost every girl throw hints at me, but none had dared to hit my car." "Who the hell do you think you are? Boston women might be head over heels for you, but certainly not me. You certainly aren't my type, and I don't even know you. Fuck off." She yanked her hand from his wrist. She walked to her car and threw roughly $1,000 at him. "There you go, broke boy. Fix your car." Grayson was shocked at how everything played out. Before he could get to his senses, Margaret entered her car and zoomed off. The following day, Grayson was on the headline again, but the headlines were different. "Woman throws money at Boston's most eligible suitor." "Billionaire Grayson forces woman to pay for car damages." "Petty Grayson. Grayson forces woman to pay for car damage." The headlines were pretty outrageous. Margaret was in her office when her secretary informed her that the press had requested her. The media escalated the story and kept following her around. Eventually, she lost her job due to the pressmen's constant disruption at her place of work. For months, Margaret was forced to fake a relationship with Grayson for the media. Soon, it blossomed into a fully fledged love story. The couple stood up from the bed. Grayson carried Margaret into the bathroom. He cleaned her up in the bathroom, and while doing so, he felt heat rise in his body. Lately, Margaret had been punishing him sexually. Today, he was determined to make the most out of it. However, she felt something poke her. She demanded the sponge, but Grayson refused to hand it over. Soon, they started dragging the sponge. By the time Margaret decided to let go of the sponge, Grayson wasn't expecting it, so he lost his balance and fell. She tried to assist him and discovered that he was bleeding. She called for an ambulance, and he was rushed to hospital. At the hospital, Grayson's mom, Patricia, showed up. She looked at Margaret disdainfully. She never liked her from the day they met. She believes Mag's nagging would be the death of her son. She asked security to throw Mag out of the hospital and proceeded to take care of her son. In a few hours, Grayson woke up to find his mom by his bed. "Where's Maggie? You almost lost your life and all you can think of is Maggie? What's so good about her?" "Mom, it was a minor cut. I slipped while bathing." "You are trying to cover up that bitch. You've stayed in that house for years and never had an accident that required stitches. Your lawyer is standing outside. He has divorce papers with him. Sign it and move on with your life. Let's pay her off. Then you can get married to Natasha." Grayson glared at his mom and removed the IV drip from his hands. The security men outside did not dare block his path when they saw him angry. "What are you doing? Grab him now," Patricia ordered the security men. Grayson was moving around the underground parking lot, hoping Maggie was still waiting around. A white Rolls-Royce parked before him. A frail-looking girl wearing a gown that showed her curves alighted the car. "Hello, Grayson. What do you want? Why do you keep acting like we are enemies? We grew up together, yet you never saw me as a woman." "Well, Natasha, I'm a married man." Maggie, who had been in the car waiting, decided to walk around the parking lot. When she alighted from the vehicle, she saw the most outrageous scene in her life. She saw Natasha move close to Grayson, and he didn't shove her away. Natasha wrapped her arms around Grayson's shoulders and whispered, "Your wife is a gold digger. If we offer her some money, she will leave. I truly love you." From Margaret's end, it seemed as though they were kissing. And before Grayson could reply to Natasha, Maggie was already behind the duo. Grayson suddenly pushed Natasha, and she fell. "Why did you push her? Weren't you enjoying a steamy session with your lover?" They heard a resounding clap from behind, which was coming from Patricia. Finally, she knows. Signing the divorce papers shouldn't be a problem now. "How dare you?" Maggie was furious and attempted to pounce on Patricia. Grayson held her back and kept fighting to free her from his grip. "Get your cheating hands off me, Grayson." He didn't budge and carried her into the car. "Grayson, tell me the truth and nothing but the truth now." "I would never leave you. I wedded you in the cathedral and said my vows before God and man, that I would stick with you till death do us part. Trust me." Grayson, the lawyer, was there, and you kissed Natasha. My mom bought in the lawyer. She wanted me to sign the papers. Natasha was telling me to offer you money because she believes you are just with me for the money. We didn't kiss. She just suddenly held my shoulder and leaned close. Maggie laughed hysterically. "You must think I'm an idiot. Stop the car now." "No." She reached out for the wheel, and the car swept left and right as they both fought to control the wheel. When Grayson lifted his face to look at the road, the car ran into a truck. He knew if he suddenly stepped on the brake, the vehicle would somersault. He grabbed Margaret in his arms to shield her just before the car rammed into the truck. Margaret heard the blaring sound of both car horns before she became unconscious. Margaret had a few bruises. She didn't wake up until 1 week later because she was in shock. The smell of disinfectant invaded her nose and appalled her. Images of the accident flooded her mind. She remembered her husband had shielded her before the crash. She removed the IV and got out of bed. At the hospital reception, she heard the broadcaster mention the burial of a particular business mogul, Grayson Humphrey. Her eyes widened in shock. She quickly hailed a taxi to St. Mary's Cathedral. On her way, she kept praying the news shouldn't be true. When she entered the church, she saw Patricia paying her last respect. Immediately, both women saw each other and they froze. Mag ran to the coffin and collapsed before it. On the other hand, Patricia felt angry seeing the daughter-in-law she was dissatisfied with. "Wench, I told my son he would be the end of you. Yet he didn't listen. It would help if you were satisfied since he is dead. Somebody kick her out of this place." Patricia yelled at Margaret. Margaret went back home devastated. Everything in their home was just as they had left it. The breakfast Grayson served was still lying on the table. His clothes were everywhere. She felt his warm hands caress her abdomen and whispered, "Let's make." She tried to hold those hands, but they were not there. She cried profusely until she fell asleep. It's been 2 weeks since Grayson's burial. When she noticed she was running out of food, she managed to visit the shopping mall, only to discover all the cards Grayson had given had been blocked. She knew Patricia was behind it. For a week plus, all she did was cry herself to sleep, eat chocolate, drink water, then cry again. She had no clue where her life was currently headed. She knew she had become a poor widow, with just a house filled with memories of her husband. "Gray, can you get me some chocolates?" she asked from her sleep. And when she woke up, she discovered she was dreaming about him again. She walked into the kitchen to pick up some chocolates and found she had exhausted them. Inside the jar, she saw an envelope. She had never picked her chocolates before. Gray's duty had always been, and he performed the task excellently. She tore the envelope and found a letter in it. It was a letter from Grayson. It read, "Dear Maggie, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to watch you curl up and sleep. I love you, and that won't change. Maggie, if you found this envelope, I'm no longer by your side. You never get a bar of chocolate yourself since we got married. Whenever I take a bar of chocolate from the jar, I pray to God that you never get chocolates yourself one day. My mom would always say, Margaret will be your end. Maggie, in your stead, will I happily die over and over again. I shield you from the world. I'd stand against nations and anyone who dares to speak hate of you. My feelings for you are unexplainable. Even now, I long to caress you. You hate me when I'm clingy, but it was the only way I thought of showing you how much you mean to me. I was too afraid to lose even a nanosecond away from you. My promise to you is, in another world, I'd be waiting to have you again as my lawfully wedded, beautiful, and nagging wife. My love for you is unconditional and never-ending. You are the brightness in my life and the meaning behind my smile. I hope I was able to prove how much I love you. P.S. Check the envelope and you'd find another paper. Take it to the bank and you'd be paid monthly for as long as you live. Your loving and daring husband. At this point, Margaret broke down in tears. She realized how she had cheated herself. She knew deep down she spent all her time with Grayson, whining about petty things rather than enjoying and living in the moment. Death, how cruel are you? Grayson, what will I do with all of the money when you are not here?